Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
This is the Daily Memphian Politics Podcast. I'm Bill Dries. The main event is Shelby County Commissioner Tami Sawyer to talk about the commission's Black Caucus, as well as the budget, the bill in the Tennessee legislature banning the teaching of critical race theory, and her plans in the 2022 election year. Top of the podcast, the U.S. House vote approving a bipartisan January 6th Capitol Insurrection Commission. How did the city's two congressmen vote on the matter? Republican Congressman David Kustoff of Germantown voting no, Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen of Memphis voting yes. As this is recorded, no comment from Kustoff on his vote. Cohen, on the House floor before the vote, brought a blow-up of Jack Nicholson from the movie A Few Good Men, emblazoned with the line, "You can't handle the truth." Kustoff, you may remember, voting the same day of the insurrection after the violence that temporarily halted the Electoral College certification to contest Electoral College results in Pennsylvania. The closed Hernando de Soto Bridge getting a lot of attention from Republican U.S. Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, who quizzed Biden administration officials, including Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, on it in committee this past week in Washington. The bridge shut down quickly, becoming a symbol in the Republican and Democratic back and forth on infrastructure nationally. As Hagerty questioned the Biden administration's definition of infrastructure, which includes broadband along with bridges and roads, acting Federal Highway Administrator Stephanie Pollock in the city for what Cohen described as a hands-on fact-finding mission. Cohen commending the Biden administration for its attention to the closing that enters its second week, May 25th. Earlier in the week, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee in the city urging patience while saying the state is focused on repairing the bridge. He also said that he was not sure there was enough infrastructure funding in the Biden administration bill to address repairs to the bridge. Two deals at City Hall this past week in the works, the city administration buying the Coke bottling plant that borders the fairgrounds and Liberty Bowl Stadium specifically. While the deal has not closed yet, the price is locked in per City Chief Operating Officer Doug McCowan at $3 million, well below the appraised value. With the property, the city would convert some of it to about 1,000 parking spaces for the fairgrounds conversion to Liberty Park. This would be parking immediately southeast of the stadium. The rest of the property, including the plant itself, would become a maintenance yard for some city functions like fire apparatus, as well as the city's public service corps and the horticulture operation of the Parks and Neighborhoods Division. These were the city functions that were the next phase of the city yard on Knight Arnold, the site of the old Walter Simmons housing development. The cost of moving to Knight Arnold, about $48 million compared to about $20 million for the move-in at Hollywood and Southern. So the latest addition to Liberty Park is not a new attraction. It's the answer to the question that has arisen in the past whenever new elements have been announced there. Where will the largest crowds to come to the fairgrounds en masse, the more than 65,000 that would be a sellout crowd at the Liberty Bowl, where would those people park? The second deal, the City Council approving Mayor Jim Strickland's call for a $10 million loan to the expansion of Leftwich Tennis Center in Audubon Park, as that project's cost has gone from $19 million to $24 million, 12 courts to 36 courts, 12 indoor and 24 outdoor. The loan to be covered by private donations, with all but $2.5 million of the private cash pledged over several years. The University of Memphis, whose tennis team will be the primary tenant of the City Center, agreeing to come up with any of the $2.5 million that is not raised. Also at City Hall this past week, Ashley Cash confirmed by the council as the new Director of Housing and Community Development, Cash best known as the driving force behind the Memphis 3.0 plan, the first citywide 20-year guideline for land use and planning since the early 1980s. She succeeds Paul Young, who left the post to become president and CEO of the Downtown Memphis Commission. The state has signed off on a recertified county property tax rate of $3.45. That's about 5 cents lower than what county leaders estimated the rate would be, taking into account the increase in property values countywide in this year's reappraisal for taxation purposes. By state law, the recertified tax rate must produce the same amount of revenue and no more as the current rate of $4.05 produces, with an allowance for successful appeals of the new property values. About 25,000 of those appeals filed so far and to be decided locally. That volume of appeals, one of the reasons the state went below the $3.50 that county leaders estimated. Also at the Tennessee Comptroller's Office this week, Comptroller Jason Mumpower telling county and city governments across the state to begin getting ready for U.S. Census data for redrawing their district boundaries, the once-a-decade process. The state gets the county-level census data this September. That's later than usual. The state's deadline to complete redistricting for local governments is New Year's Day 2022. Mumpower saying local government leaders should start now setting up redistricting committees. As we've said before on this podcast, county primary elections are less than a year away. Candidates running for the 13 county commission seats on the ballot in May with the general election in August can begin picking up and filing their qualifying petitions this December 20th. Dropped and settled a Chancery Court lawsuit over access to body cam video of a Memphis police officer tasing 3 suspects, 1 in handcuffs, over a 2-month period in 2019. The lawsuit by Mark Pereskia, director of the University of Memphis Institute for Public Service Reporting, and the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press dropped in exchange for the release of the body cam footage involving now former officer Colin Berryhill. The reporting on the body cam footage and the footage, as well as an account of the 3 years that it took to get the case to District Attorney Amy Wyrick, whose conduct review team declined to prosecute Berryhill, all of that published in the Daily Memphian. This was the first case review by the recently formed conduct review team for the 3 years Berryhill remained on patrol. The MPD continued its case for a year until Berryhill resigned in 2020, the day before an administrative hearing was scheduled. During that time, the city claimed the body cam footage was part of an ongoing investigation, although it was a police internal investigation to determine if Berryhill had violated police policies and not broken laws. Police supervisors determined and filed administrative charges against Berryhill in October 2019, then the 1-year continuance. It wasn't until February of this year that the MPD referred the case to the DA's office for review and possible criminal charges. Joining us now is Shelby County Commissioner Tami Sawyer, who is chairwoman of the newly created Black Caucus of the 13-member Shelby County Commission. Commissioner, let's start there. Tell me about the intent, the purpose of the Black Caucus of the Shelby County Commission.
Thanks for having me today, Bill. So the Black Caucus was created, one, to provide just legal coverage for the Black commissioners, as since we've convened as a body, we've held events and participate in Black Caucus meetings at the state and the federal level. And so we were informed by legal that, because we have a Black History program, because we do other things, that it would be in our best interest to create a caucus. Second, the caucus purpose is to try to reach out more to constituents, Black constituents, and ensure that we have some focused goals that will impact our community.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, there is a Congressional Black Caucus, a Black Caucus of Tennessee legislators, and those organizations have programs and efforts and funding that go beyond simply being a block of vote on issues within a given legislative body, right?
Yes, they do. Mm-hmm. So they do policy and they do community engagement. They do scholarships. So we're looking at a lot of things from participatory budgeting next year, to how we can work on blight, to criminal justice reform and crime reduction.
So those are some of the issues that the caucus wants to get involved in at that level. In explaining the caucus to some of your colleagues on the county commission, you referred to Commissioner Michael Whaley, who is white, as the Congressman Steve Cohen of the caucus, a reference to Cohen making an effort at the start of his tenure in the U.S. House to become part of the Congressional Black Caucus. So how does that work with this caucus?
So our caucus, legally, all commissioners are allowed to attend meetings, and if they attend the meeting, they're allowed to vote. Okay.
All right. And are all of the meetings open, since this is elected officials and local elected officials, and there's this thing called the open meetings law?
All of the meetings are open. And so our first meeting was held in the chambers and open. Only Black commissioners attended, but had a commissioner who was not Black attended, they would have been allowed to participate.
Okay. As we record, the commission has a vote Monday, May 24th on a resolution urging Governor Bill Lee to veto the bill that was passed by the Tennessee legislature at the end of the session in Nashville that bans teaching critical race theory and or the 1619 Project and even goes beyond that. You and Commissioner Van Turner are the original sponsors of this. The discussion of both the commission and the city council the week before has taken in a lot of territory, I think, probably more discussion than we see for an ordinary resolution that might express the opinion of the body on a certain matter. What is at stake at this moment beyond whether the governor signs the bill or not? Because every indication is he will, and may have by the time people are listening to this.
So Tennessee has had a wild year as far as what's happened in Nashville between the legislature and the governor and the type of bills that have been passed. They've been extremely discriminatory, Bill, and not just against Black people, but against all people of color, and especially against LGBTQ people. I'd even throw out that people who are experiencing poverty are also, have been on the receiving end of that discrimination this year. And so this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of people across the state. Because let me tell you, as a Black woman who was educated in a mostly white K through 12 environment, my parents always supplemented my education so that I would have an understanding of my community and of my history. It's a large part of why I am who I am today. It's a large part of why I'm able to have the conversations I have today, because I know my history. I know the people who fought for our equality and our freedoms, and I know how they did that. Our kids, it's an educational fact that when a child doesn't see themselves in their curriculum, they're more than likely not going to connect. Our kids are already struggling in SES, and if we remove the story of the fight for freedom and equality, if we remove any mention of those struggles of the inequity that exists around them to this day, we have a segregated school system right now. If they can't learn, they can't fight that. Mm-hmm.
And during the city council's discussion, there were white and Black city council members who said some of the things that you just said, that, look, I didn't learn these things when I was in school at the school that I went to, and I think that it should be taught in those schools. So this is not just about Black students learning about Black history, is it?
No, it's about all students. You know, Facing History in Ourselves is a major organization, and it's housed right here next to the Civil Rights Museum. If this bill is signed this week or next by the governor, their work within the school system is in trouble. And Facing History in Ourselves, was founded by the Jewish community, largely funded by the Jewish community. And so not just the work that they talk about, about Black people and Latinx people, but the work that they do on the Holocaust. It will impact how you are able to talk about oppression, how you are able to talk about violent injustice.
Do you think there will be a challenge of this law that includes plaintiffs from right here in Memphis?
Oh, absolutely. I am very sure that this will not be allowed to just be signed and go on into the sunset. There are already challenges via petitions. We submitted a petition of over 2,000 signatures, myself and a group of other organizations, in addition to a letter signed by 50 leaders of nonprofits and elected officials requesting the governor not sign the bill. And the same thing has come from the ACLU of Tennessee. The same thing has come from the Nashville Ed Trust. We've seen movement out of East Tennessee as well about this. And so what I think you'll see is what may be a very long legal fight, but it will be challenged.
Mm-hmm. We're talking the day after the latest budget committee hearings by the county commission, and a lot of detail packed into several hours yesterday. The county's recertified property tax rate, according to the state, is $3.45 to create the same amount of revenue as the current $4.05 property tax rate. Do you think that ultimately the tax rate that the commission passes, when this is all said and done, will be at $3.45, or will the commission have some discussion about going above that?
I don't think there's a political climate to raise taxes, so I think that it'll stay at the approved rate.
Mm-hmm. You heard some bold capital plans for Shelby County schools to the tune of about $55 million over the next decade. What do you think of that and the list that comes with that includes a new Fraser High School, a new Treadwell, and an Orange Mound K through 8?
I think that the capital improvement plans are necessary. I think that the new school buildings are definitely needed. But I also, one thing that I think also has to be considered with any type of sweeping plan like that is when you're combining schools in historical locations and removing the schools that communities have been anchored in, there also has to be a cultural change plan. But I'm supportive of Shelby County's efforts, but we also have a lot of money coming in from the federal government. So I think we're going to, Commissioner Whaley, my vice chair on the education committee, and I plan to meet to discuss, how do we meet this ask? Is it giving the full amount, or is it encouraging them to use some of the federal money and part of, our money? How do we answer this request?
Mm-hmm. And the school system has, while the county commission and the city council and the city and county governments have the American Rescue Plan, school systems across the state have what is called ESSER. And that's a type of federal funding for the pandemic. Am I on the right track there? Right. Yes.
So there's several phases of the ESSER plan, and we received a briefing on that this week. And it's quite, SES has actually, I think, done a good job figuring out how to spend that money. We had a conversation yesterday about how some of it will go into mental health care and social work, which actually students have, reached out to the commission asking us to fund more mental healthcare professionals in schools, more social workers, and so more support for teachers is included in that, more training for teachers. And so I think that there's a lot of good things that they figured out what to do with the money. There was not a lot of conversation yesterday about additional items or things that were missed. I think we, dug in a little bit for more detail, but I think they're on the right track with the ESSER money.
Mm-hmm. Is ESSER operating as opposed to capital?
As opposed to CIP, yes. As opposed to capital,
okay.
Yes.
All right. So when there's discussion about the Reimagine 901 plan, which is the capital plan, that's not the same pot of money or the same potential source of funding as ESSER would be.
Right.
Okay. As we were talking before we started recording this, the budget season this year looks a little different than it did last year, and everybody's pretty happy about that. The mayor and Edmund Ford Jr., who is the chairman of the commission's budget committee, actually said at several points at the last budget committee hearing that they have the same general outlook on where the budget should go this year. That certainly didn't happen last year.
I have to be honest. I for anyone who was listening, I got on the mic and said, let me be clear. I think we're in agreement here. Because at one point I looked up and the whole tone had shifted, and, I buckled in for a fight, not on, to witness one.
Right.
So I was definitely pleased. I think we work better when we are not, the mayor and us are on the same page, and, as much as possible. And that's not always going to happen. But the budget shouldn't have to be a contentious process. I think it takes a lot of work for us to meet all of the needs. The budget shouldn't have to be a contentious process. I think it takes a lot of work to meet all of the needs of all of our constituents and of all of the organizations and businesses that make requests. The mayor presents one thing, we add in, we sprinkle in the flavor. And so I'm just glad that, yesterday, after a very long week, last week of daily budget hearings and, yesterday, a very long day, that it seemed like there was a positive light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm. So where are you with the concept that you all might pass a budget and set a tax rate pretty quickly that deals primarily with replenishing lost revenues from the pandemic, and then see what that does and see what else you have in the way of American Rescue Plan funds that could be subbed or swapped out, I'll say, for regular county revenues, and then come maybe September or the start of the fall, you look at what kind of extra revenue you have when you bring the full force of the American Rescue Plans to bear on the budget.
I think that is a good idea. It made sense to me when the mayor and Chairman Ford presented that yesterday, because it doesn't make sense for us to jump into our wish list when we are, still attempting to, recover from a pandemic and recover from actually 2 years of expensive budget seasons. And so this is an opportunity for us to make sure the county is in a good situation, honestly, as this term winds down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Because come May of next year, about a year from now, we will be into the county primary elections.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me what's on your wish list whenever the commission gets to that, be it next week or be it in September. What would you like to try to do that's not in the budget?
So in the same vein of, not necessarily being fiscally responsible, but trying to let the budget, do what it needs to do, for the sake of the county. I have a very short wish list. My list includes $1 million for a COVID-19 long hauler fund. It would be a fund that works similarly to rent assistance or the Share the Tab program for restaurant workers and, people who have long-term COVID ailments would be able to access the fund for medical needs. There are people who are a year later still suffering from the impact of having COVID-19 and not just respiratory issues. And a year of doctor's appointments and treatments is expensive. And so that's my largest wish list item.
Mm-hmm. Would this go to pay for health care, or would this be for someone who's unable to work to help them pay the bills and get through this thing? And we should point out after a whole lot of people are saying, well, this should be over by now, it's not for a lot of people.
It's not over. And, it would, my idea is it would go for health care. You would either show a need for prescription payment or, medical bills. But I think it could be flexible because to the point of your question, someone who maybe they went ahead and paid the medical bill because they had to, but they can't afford the electricity. But we also still have a lot of federal money. There's a lot of money out there. People can apply for rent assistance, almost $10,000 worth of rent assistance,
right.
$750 worth of utility assistance. And so I think that those funds will exist for a while because there's a lot of money. And while we open back up very quickly, the streets are full, the masks are off. People have to remember that COVID-19 is not gone.
Mm-hmm. And we should also point out that the first stimulus money that came around, it had some pretty strict rules that said that it had to be spent within a year's time or by the end of a year. With the American Rescue Plan Act, there are, I think, over 100 pages of new guidance on how to use the money. So it's pretty strict too. But this is money that goes over the next 3.5 years for its use, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So let's end with the structural imbalance that the county commission talked about a year ago and has talked about in past budget seasons. Does county government still have that structural imbalance as things stand now with the budget plans that are out there? And if so, what does the county do about that long term?
Tell me what you mean by structural imbalance.
That there's the belief among some commissioners that when the tax rate was recertified in 2017 or before that it was too low, and that it should, that as a result, the county's kind of been at a loss in terms of revenues coming in versus what it needs to do.
So absolutely, I believe that we still have an imbalance with the tax rate. But as I said earlier, there's just not a political will. And we definitely couldn't get away with raising the tax rate coming out of COVID-19 and the pandemic when so many people and businesses are recovering. I don't think that people realize how low our tax rate is. You often hear we have the highest tax burden in the state. But when you look at that through several other lenses, that's not necessarily the case. We honestly struggle to do the business of the county. Some of that might be cutting some of the fat from the budget, but there's just really a great need. We still largely represent Memphis, which is still a largely impoverished and working class city. And there's a lot of support that we have to provide and should provide to our constituents. And we're not able to do that.
Mm-hmm. And again, you don't see 7 votes there, or I guess it would be 9 votes if it were a tax hike. Either way, you don't see a majority of votes there to go above 345.
No, and you also, as we just said, we are a year out from primary elections, right? Mm-hmm. So no one who is running for any office in Memphis or Shelby County is raising taxes this year. So it wasn't even a conversation like it was last year or the year before.
Right. Actually, a motion at one point last year.
Yeah. Last year, I spoke on it. Vance, Commissioner Turner, others, we spoke on the need. It almost has not been mentioned at all. I will mention it when we vote on the tax rate Monday again, but I'm not going to move a resolution for it to be 1 to 12. Everyone has their political futures to consider, and that's the reality. Mm-hmm.
Which brings me to, I swear, my last point, and I really have to ask this. So you are running for re-election?
You say that like you're surprised.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to pin things down here.
I have not decided what my plans are for 2022.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it right there. Shelby County Commissioner Tami Sawyer. City Parks and Neighborhoods Director Nick Walker. This week on WKNO's Behind the Headlines, we will be talking about park rangers, Accelerate Memphis, and how the way we use parks has changed during the pandemic, but not just because of the pandemic. You can hear the program on the Behind the Headlines podcast. Subscribe to the Daily Memphian at dailymemphian.com. You can subscribe to this podcast and our others at Google Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I'm Bill Dries. The Daily Memphian Politics Podcast is produced by Kix Patterson.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community. The Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.